Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Butterworth. I'm Head of Environment and Consumer Services at Perth and Kinross Council. Thank you for using some of your time tonight to attend the meeting. I'll start with an apology. First of all, I'd like to apologise for the length of time it's taken for this meeting. It is some 5 weeks now, or more than 5 weeks since the flooding event, but as I'm sure you can understand that there was a lot of properties and a lot of areas affected in Perth and Kinross. So we're doing our best to speak to as many people as possible and have as many community meetings as we can. I'd like also to apologise that we had to do it online due to the COVID pandemic. So again, apologies. We would have liked to have done it face-to-face and it would have been a lot more interactive, but unfortunately we've not been able to do that. Tonight we'll have approximately a 20-minute presentation which Peter Dixon will lead, and Peter will introduce himself in a minute. He will be supported by a number of colleagues from the various agencies on the call, and they at some point tonight, when they contribute to the presentation of the questions, will also introduce themselves. But to save time, I won't do that at this moment in time. We've also got a question and answer facility, so please feel free to type your questions into the question and answer chat, and we will pick them up at the end of the presentation. So we hope tonight will be helpful for everyone. We hope that people get a better understanding of the position and the way forward. But if individuals or groups or families would like a further discussion, then we're happy to do that as well. So that's again, thanks for attending tonight, and I'll hand over to Peter now, who will take you through the presentation. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. I'm Peter Dixon. I'm a senior engineer with the council's flooding team, and just to start off, obviously, probably goes without saying that the storm we had on the 11th and 12th of August was significant. But in saying that, we appreciate that doesn't help you if you've been affected by the flooding. We recognise that the suffering and the long-term process of recovery that it involves to get back from flooding to try and get back to normal. And obviously we've had previous flooding in this area of Perth as well in recent years, and the council continues to work in partnership with Scottish Water, Scottish Environment Protection Agency, Scottish Flood Forum and the emergency services to try and assist with the recovery. So just to move on, if we go to the next slide, guys, to talk a little bit about the storm itself and the council's operational response to the storm and the other agencies as well. So during the night of 11th of August 2020, much of Scotland was affected by significant thunderstorms and heavy rainfall. The entire Perth and Kinross Council area suffered extensive rainfall, thunder and lightning for 6 hours from about 11 p.m. on the 11th of August. The flooding is now understood to have affected about 190 properties in some parts of Perth, as well as places like Alyth, Kinross, Dunning, Pitlochry and other locations. In Perth, the Met Office has confirmed that the majority of the rain came between midnight and 3 a.m, with about 42 millimetres of rain falling between 1 and 2 a.m. The total rainfall in Perth was 86.4 millimetres for the 24-hour period from 6 a.m. on the 11th to 6 a.m. on the 12th of August. And Met Office climate data indicates that Perth would normally experience an average of 65 millimetres of rain for the whole month of August. 42 millimetres in an hour is therefore exceptional and confirms that the storm was significant. Initial rainfall analysis by SEPA has confirmed this. Flooding impacts were experienced across a wide area of central and north east Scotland, and we understand SEPA are preparing a comprehensive report on the event, which will be published when complete. So that just tells you a little bit about the storm. I'm going to hand over now to Gavin Steele in Scottish Water just to talk a little bit about the flood mechanism in the area at Cavendish Avenue. Thank you.
Apologies, I was on mute there. Thanks, Peter, for that introduction. My name's Gavin Steele. I'm Scottish Water's Corporate Affairs Manager for the north of Scotland. Also on the call this evening, we've got Stephanie Beauchamp, who is from our sewer response operational team, and also Annalise McMillan from our flooding team. Turning to the flood mechanism, we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the call in terms of the work that's been done in partnership between Perth and Kinross Council and Scottish Water to understand the mechanisms of flooding and the way in which all the different drainage networks in Perth interact with each other, particularly under the influence of weather events such as the one that affected the city overnight between the 11th and the 12th of August. As Peter's already said, in a sense, the primary mechanism of flooding everywhere was the sheer intensity of rainfall that fell over a short period over that night. In terms of Cavendish Avenue and Grey Street, particularly, what we understand about the mechanism of flooding in this area is that there is a particular influence from the topography, the land and the way it sits, and the presence of a large quantity over time of impermeable surfaces, roads, driveways and other impermeable surfaces which don't allow water in significant volumes to enter the drainage networks. We do know also from the modelling work that's been done that there is a degree of sewer incapacity here, that the sewers don't have the capacity that meets the service standard that we seek to achieve all over Scotland. So it's a combination of factors, as is common in flooding hotspots such as this, and that will need to be reflected as we move forward to look at solutions.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. I'm just going to now hand over to Stuart Dall, hopefully in the Council's Roads Maintenance Partnership, just to talk about the initial operational response during the 12th of August. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, my name's Stuart Dall. I'm the Road Maintenance Partnership Manager, and my team's responsible for the reactive response to flooding and other emergencies within the council. We routinely have 2 road supervisors on overnight on a standby basis. They do a full day's work and then they're available overnight to answer call out emergencies. We also are accompanied by 4 road workers, 2 in Blairgowrie area and 2 in the Perth area. And as I said, they react to calls throughout the evening, and these are passed on by our out of hours call handlers who are Aberdeen City Council, and they take all the roads calls overnight from 5 PM through to 8:45 AM. We were aware there was a Met Office yellow warning in place covering the period, but there was nothing specific within that yellow warning. The yellow warnings are be aware warnings, and last year we had 35 and this year we've had 37 to date, and there was only 3 out of these 72 have had any effect, including this one. So we don't automatically put any special measures in place to cover a yellow warning. And we also had no river warnings in place as they would also prompt us to put additional measures in place, but we never had anything, any warnings of that nature. Aberdeen City Council had 7 call handlers working, taking calls, but they were overwhelmed by the volume of calls coming in for Perth and Kinross, Angus City, Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire and Highland as the storm spread north through the country. They received 219 calls that they could answer from Perth and Kinross Council residents and 267 that they couldn't answer. And if you called looking for assistance and couldn't get through, then I can only apologise, but it was just down to the sheer volume of calls. The calls that they can answer, however, do then channel down to the 2 supervisors we have on call, and they then have to triage and deal with them on a priority basis. A storm with the intensity that we had would need pretty much a full workforce in place to deal with it. And again, if you called and got through and we weren't able to get to you to assist you, I apologise, but the team were truly swamped. The 2 road workers we've got based in Blairgowrie, we called them down to Perth to assist, but this then left us short when the weather moved north, and it left us short in the Blairgowrie area. As the storm developed, we called in additional staff from 3 AM and then 4 AM to assist, but we do have to carefully consider how many we call in throughout the night, as they then need rested up. Otherwise we wouldn't have anyone in the aftermath to deal with issues during the day. So we did have to carefully consider how many of our staff were called in overnight and how many of our road workers we tried to get in as well. All the officers and road workers then worked throughout the following days to tidy up the damage and repair it. A number of areas remain in need of a permanent repair, and the officers are working as quickly as they can to get around all these different areas, in addition to doing their duties that they would normally be doing had there been no storm. So that's the sort of response that we can provide. Although we're a Category 1 responder in terms of emergency planning, we're not an emergency service, so we don't have a depot of men and officers standing by for such events, and it does take us some time to attend on a call-out basis. Peter, you want to pass on to Scottish Water?
Yeah, if you could please, Gavin Steele again. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So in terms of our operational response, our position is not really significantly different to the councils in respect of the weather warnings that we see and our ability to prepare. We first became aware of the scale of the impact that this particular weather event was having on the drainage networks in Perth around about midnight, between midnight and 1 AM, when an alarm that we have at a relatively nearby hotspot on the network that's susceptible to flooding activated. In an ideal world, that system would alert us and allow us to respond as flooding is ongoing. In this instance, the flooding occurred 6 minutes after the alarm activated, so there really wasn't opportunity with the surge of rainfall that came through the area at that time for us to get resources in place before substantial flooding had already affected customers. In terms of the response, our initial response was hampered by the impacts of flooding on the road network, and we had difficulty getting resources to the sites that were affected in the centre of Perth during the course of the night. Following on in the following days, we received contact from I think 4 customers in the area, two properties in Cavendish Avenue and 2 in Grey Street, requesting assistance and that we attend to clean up. Again, those came in, I think 3 of them rather, in the immediate period after the flooding, and 1 later on where a resident had been decanted and it was raised with us later. We've been dealing with a considerable quantity of customers in need of assistance as a result of this weather event, both in Perth and across a number of other areas of Scotland that were badly impacted, but both working with our sewer response team and with contractors. We've been trying to provide support, and certainly if there are any customers who are still in need of cleanups where they have been out of their homes, unfortunately, as a result of this incident, we'd certainly encourage them to contact us, and more generally for customers to be aware that if they are affected by sewer flooding, either within their homes or within their gardens, that we will attend and assist with cleanup as soon as we can after that's happened.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Now I think we've got Stuart Watson from Police Scotland on the call as well, and just invite him to say a little bit about the emergency services response as well. Thank you. Don't know if you're muted, Stuart.
Is that me? Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yeah, thank you.
Apologies, I thought I had unmuted. Yeah, so my name's Stuart Watson. I'm a community sergeant for Perth, and obviously the night in question was difficult for all the residents and all the services that were responding. A lot of questions obviously have been asked in relation to road closures, which is often looked at ourselves to do it. The difficulty in these weather conditions were obviously we were getting a lot of calls, as was everybody else, fire service, council. It's difficult to put proper road closures in place with that weather. To close a road requiring signs and cones in that weather, they are just going to get, with all the water, they're just going to float away. Other than leaving officers at particular points, which we don't have the resource to do that when something like this is going on, that is the only way we can make sure the road closures are in place and stop people going down them, which obviously caused the bow waves in the properties. But it was difficult. Every time something like this happens, you learn a lot, and we'll do that going forward, working together. But yeah, obviously, if there is any questions from the residents in relation to that, I'll obviously answer them best I can. If I can't answer them tonight, I'll certainly answer them once I have the information available.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Now I know Mike Rumgay, the Perth Fire Station Commander, was trying to get on, but I think he's been having some technical problems. So if anyone's got any questions they want to ask of the fire service, you can put them in the chat box or forward us on to them after the meeting, and we'll get a response back to you. Can we have the next slide, please? So just to move on and talk a little bit about flood recovery and future steps, I'm just going to invite the Scottish Flood Forum, Carol Rayburn, hopefully he's on the call, to talk a little bit about the flood recovery work that's ongoing. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Rayburn. I'm the Director of the Scottish Flood Forum. You may have seen me in Perth with our mobile unit, registering those who required the support from us. So the Scottish Flood Forum is a charity, and we're funded by the Scottish Government with the aim of supporting communities who have experienced flooding and who are at risk of flooding. There are two main arms to what we can do for you. The first is in terms of recovery. So if you're dealing with insurance companies and have experienced issues with them, we can help support you. And there's also the resilience aspect, which is helping you to take future measures to protect your homes from flooding. One of the free services that we offer is a property level protection assessment. So one of my team would come round, visit your home, and give recommendations as to suitable products that would help you in the event of flooding. Now, we are a small team, there's only 5 of us, and we are having to work differently because of COVID. And one of the things that we have noticed up and down the country is the different ways that insurance companies are responding to people like yourselves who have been flooded. So we've seen delays in sending out loss adjusters, and perhaps doing virtual assessments, so on screen, a bit like this. So we appreciate that it's new for many of you out there, and if we can help support you and give you an idea of what to expect in these circumstances, please call us. So we have an email address, admin@scottishfloodforum.org, and that's the best way of contacting us at the moment. We have heard about the new COVID restrictions today, but given the fact that tradesmen seem to fall out with those new restrictions, we are hopeful that the property level protection assessments that we offer can continue to take place, and we know that some of you have already been in contact with us. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat tonight or to email us direct. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks for that, Carol. I'm now going to hand over to hopefully Karen Bloodworth's on the line, just to give us an update from SEPA into things like floodline, etc. Thank you.
Okay, hi there, my name's Karen Bloodworth. I'm the flood advisor for the North East area, working for SEPA. A little bit of background on what we provide. The Scottish Flood Forecasting Service is provided in partnership with SEPA and the Met Office. So the service provides a daily national flood guidance statement, which is issued to all of the Category 1 and Category 2 agencies, which includes the local authorities and emergency responders, and that provides an assessment of the risk of flooding for the next 5 days. The Scottish Flood Forecasting Service also supports SEPA's Floodline service, which provides live flooding information and advice on how to prepare or cope with the impacts of flooding 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. For those of you who are registered with Floodline, you can receive flood messages for your area of interest direct to your phone. So for the recent flood event, SEPA issued a flood alert for Tayside on the 10th of August, highlighting a risk of heavy thundery showers, which may result in flooding impacts from surface water and small watercourses. The flood alert was updated over the following days when further information was available. But due to the difficulty in forecasting these kind of summer intense thunderstorms, in terms of locations and timings, we're unable to provide specific information where the impacts may occur, and therefore the risks of flood and impacts from these type of storms is highlighted across a larger regional area. However, SEPA have made a commitment to explore and trial available approaches to surface water flood forecasting, and we do hope to make some developments in this over the coming years. As Peter's already mentioned, that SEPA undertook some post-flood analysis looking at the rain gauges we had available in the network, and this confirms that in Perth it was an extreme flood event with nearly a month's rain on 12 hours. So SEPA are currently producing a national report on the flood event, and I'm hoping that that's going to be available in the next week or so. But if you'd like to find any more information on Floodline, you can find that at the website at Floodline Scotland, or you can also contact SEPA via the SEPA website and they'll pass that on to me. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Karen. Now just going to move down to the next item on the agenda, which is talk a little bit about the Perth Integrated Catchment Study, which is a study that's been going on to study the surface water flood risk and the sewer flood risk. Just to invite Gavin Steele from Scottish Water to talk a little bit about that again. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So yes, in recent years, under the framework of the Flood Risk Management Act, which is a piece of legislation that seeks to coordinate the way in which the various public agencies that have a role in relation to flooding work together. Perth has been identified as one of 17 areas across Scotland that were prioritised for this piece of work that's called an integrated catchment study. And essentially this seeks to build a model that gives an understanding of how all the different drainage systems that serve a catchment interact with each other. So including natural drainage systems, surface water, culverted watercourses, open watercourses, and the sewer system as well, and building a picture underground of how that all functions together. It has taken a significant time to pull the integrated catchment study together, just to give residents on the call an understanding. It's a very detailed and substantial piece of work in order to collect the data that formed the basis of the model. River surveys were carried out at 518 locations within Perth, Luncarty and Bridgeverne, 829 sewer manholes with a focus of surveys, and 13 kilometres of CCTV survey were carried out through underground drainage networks, whether sewers or culverted watercourses. So it's all about trying to inform a much more detailed and accurate picture of where the drainage networks are underground and how they interact with each other than was available before. And that provides a foundation for much more coordinated joint work to take place in the future, looking to solve the areas that are at greatest risk of flooding. So the good news is that the ICS, although it did take some time, that work was completed in December of last year. So we now have that tool in our toolkit when it comes to working with the council and looking at what we can do to reduce the risk of flooding in the parts of Perth that are at greatest risk. And Cavendish Avenue and Grey Street, with one other location within the city, has been identified as an area of highest priority jointly by Scottish Water and the Council for a project to be pursued. So there's currently work ongoing to develop options and to look at what we can do to meet the service standard that the sewer should meet, and to look at some of the other contributions to the flooding as well. It's still a little early to say exactly what the solution that's brought forward will be, but the focus is to accelerate the development of solutions, both in this case and for the other location in Perth that I mentioned, with a view to having identified an outline design for a preferred option by February next year, which will enable the council to seek funding via the next cycle of funding opportunity that there is for funding of these kinds of projects from the Scottish Government, and will then be able, we hope, to move forward with a joint project. In very general terms, it's very likely that the project will consist of some combination of underground storage to cope with surges of stormwater, coupled with efforts to identify places where surface water can be disconnected from the combined sewer network and managed via alternative means. So that's a work in progress, and I think we would hope we'll be in a position to share some more detail with residents around the turn of the year, but there is work happening. Having said that, just in summing up, it is important for us to say that in locations like this that are prone to flooding, what we are seeking to do in partnership with the council is to reduce the flood risk. We won't, unfortunately, be able to remove it altogether, and the flood risk, the flood protection standard that we work to, unfortunately, is not of a level that would provide robust protection against an extreme weather event of the kind that affected the area on the 12th of August. So I appreciate that's not welcome news to anyone whose home is affected in these circumstances, but what we can do and what we will do is work to reduce the flood risk. What we won't be able to do is to remove it altogether, and I think it is important for residents to understand that.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. So next on the agenda is just to talk briefly about the Council and SEPA's flood risk management plans. So SEPA published a series of flood risk management strategies, as they're called, back in December 2015. And they cover the whole of Scotland. This area of Perth is within the Tay flood risk management strategy, and local authorities then went on to publish local flood risk management plans in June 2016. So we've been steadily working our way through that plan, and the work Gavin has been talking about for the Perth Integrated Catchment Study forms part of the existing local flood risk management plan. Now those plans have already been undergoing a review, and with a view to publishing a second cycle of plans. Those won't be until December 2021 and June 2022, but before that there will be a public consultation early next year on the draft plans that will be put out then. So you begin to get an idea of what direction those are heading in early next year. And just to sum up and to bring us to a close, just talk briefly about ongoing communication arrangements for residents. I think as Mark alluded to at the start of the online meeting, we have had a high volume of correspondence from residents, and this has had to be prioritised, so apologies if we haven't got back to you quickly enough, but it's just been due to the sheer volume of correspondence that we received. Services have been in quite high demand on this one. We have set up a generic email address, and everything's going through that now and getting prioritised, and information and updates are included on the Council's August 2020 webpage. And the links to both of these will be on the final slide on the presentation, which will come up in a minute or two. Hopefully more community bulletins will follow on, and there'll be an opportunity for further meetings after this event. And if you want to request that, just pop a little request in the chat box and we can follow up on that. Okay, so I think I'll hand back to Mark now just to sum up. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks a lot for that, Peter, and thanks a lot, guys, for your contributions. If we can just move straight on to the questions, question answer facility, and I'll work down one by one. If we don't answer any of your questions comprehensively, or you need more information, if you can just add another question at the bottom, and we'll try to give you the best response that we can. And if we need to go away and come back with information, we'll do that if that's okay. But just before I start, again, apologies. I know this is not ideal in terms of we would have liked more of an engaging session where we could actually have a discussion, but unfortunately we weren't allowed to do that. But hopefully you will find this helpful. So if I start off with a question from Councillor McCall, and also a related question, I think, from Stuart. Councillor McCall's question is around the capacity, the incapacity or capacity of the sewer, and I think also Stuart's question is similar to that in terms of the main issue at Cavendish Avenue is the capacity of the sewer at the junction there. I'm not sure if Gavin, you've actually answered that in terms of your contributions to the presentation, but I don't know if you want to add anything more in terms of those two questions.
Thanks, Mark. So in terms of the sewer incapacity, yeah, as outlined a few minutes ago, we do have a project in development jointly with the council arising from the integrated catchment study. We're at an optioneering stage at the moment. I suppose the main thing that I can add at this stage is just to offer by way of explanation that projects to resolve problems such as this are typically quite challenging to deliver, particularly in urban locations, and that's partly a reflection of the fact that space is needed to construct the sort of engineered underground elements of a solution, and indeed space is in many cases needed to find alternative ways in which surface water can be managed independently of the combined sewer. So as I say, work is ongoing. The ICS is the foundation of that work, and we hope there will be more tangible news that we can share with residents relatively soon. But yes, it's a difficult problem to solve, and potentially it's a problem that involves significant investment as well.
Great, thanks for that, Gavin. Moving to the next question, Stuart is asking about the clean-up and where this is up to, and Stuart Dior has provided the response and is committed to get more information back to Stuart after the meeting. If Stuart, who's asked the question, would like to ask a further question or more detailed question, please put it in the chat. And I'll just move down to the next question. The next question is about the response, and who was part of the response? I think it's fair to say that clearly all the organisations, all the partners on the call tonight were part of that response in some way, shape or form, and to collectively we provided the response on the day and the subsequent support and advice that we have done. But I don't believe that anyone like the Red Cross or anywhere other organisation was involved, unless people can correct me on that. But I think collectively, you know, there was 5 or 6 partner agencies, and I think we all did our best to support you on the day and have done subsequently. Okay, then I'll just move down. Next question is around gully cleaning, and again, Stuart Dior has provided the response to that in terms of the gully cleansing, and again, we'll provide further information after the meeting. Next question is, every time heavy rainfall, there's heavy on Grey Street, the pathways and gardens, the streets and the drains start to overflow, flooding the street, and what is planned to improve the drainage on the street? I think, Gavin, you've already answered that question. Is that right?
Yep, I think so, unless there's anything around the road drains specifically. But I think the challenge is that the road drains are connected to the combined sewer, so all the drainage systems are interrelated as the ICS work really gets to the root of.
Thanks, Gavin. Fraser is making a comment more than anything. Fraser saying, with reference to Stuart's question, with the gullies, is also starting at the Glasgow Road. That would need to be done, as with them being blocked, forces more water down bottom of Cavendish Avenue. So I think that's more as a comment than actually a question, but thanks for that. Stuart asked another quite long question. Are residents in these high priority areas going to be provided with sandbags to assist with future events? We were unable to get through to the emergency council number during the flooding. When we finally got through 2 hours later, we were told that the sandbags could not be provided as the water was no longer about to enter our property. We were advised to buy our own sandbags, and it was our own responsibility to shore up our property. As stated above, the primary issue for our properties is the sewer capacity at the junction. In terms of the final point there, I think we've covered the sewer capacity, and certainly Gavin has done that. In terms of moving forward, and we can certainly look at the issues around trying to get hold of the emergency number and the response, and we will certainly do that as part of the review. I don't know if anyone wants to make a comment around the provision of sandbags in the future and shoring up properties.
Hi Mark, it's Stuart here. I'll come in. We haven't historically provided sandbags to property owners in advance of any flood events, because the primary responsibility to protect property from flooding does rest with the owner. We do try to provide sandbags during an event, but as stated earlier, we don't have a huge number of people available in the middle of the night, so we do have to triage who were available to give sandbags to and who were not. So the reason that someone else said you're not getting them because you're not about to be flooded is because we were still working around people who potentially were being flooded. So that's the reason. We can't be every place all the time. And again, apologies that it took you 2 hours to get through to the contact centre.
If I can pick up from there, as I highlighted earlier, one of the services that the Scottish Flood Forum offers is free property level protection assessments. So moving forward, if any of the residents would like to use this service, it's basically what we do is we go out and have a look at the outside of your property and make recommendations as to what might be an appropriate measure to protect your home. So sandbags are just one of the potential options. Again, thinking about the different protection measures that there are. If, for example, you had an elderly relative, then moving a sandbag is not necessarily going to be perhaps the most appropriate measure, and there are other products out on the market that we can give you advice on. So as I say, moving forward, that would perhaps be something that could help you in the future, and we can give advice on that.
Thank you for that response. Just moving down, then there's a comment from Councillor McCall around the level of flood risk, and she's saying there that she will contact Scottish Water, maybe yourself, Gavin, separately, just to have a further conversation around that, if that's okay. The next question is around timescales. What realistic timescales are you giving us for these repairs? I'm not actually sure what specifically with the repairs you're relating to, whether it's the clean up or whether it's the drains or the longer term plan around capacity. So maybe if you could be more specific, we could help out there, unless anyone would like to make an attempt at answering that.
I can maybe say something, Mark, if that's helpful. Firstly, just to double back slightly in the chat, I think there was Stuart had raised a question about cleanup where it sounded like there was still something outstanding. I appreciate the council's looking at that, but I think that possibly may be for us. So I think my colleague Stephanie is going to reply in the chat if she hasn't already with contact details. So please do contact us about that, and we'll follow up with you to clarify what remains to be done and what we're able to do. I think turning to the question about timeframes, which I think two people have raised in the questions, as I've said already, we're quite a lot further through what is a complex process than we were a few years ago. So this issue has been receiving attention and is, just as we speak at the moment, through the project team that's trying to develop a solution. It's not a question of delivering repairs, it's a question of engineering a solution to deal with the hydraulic constraint that exists in this area of Perth, both in terms of the sewer network and the way in which surface water drainage networks interact with it. So at this stage, our focus is on developing a preferred option and putting the council in a position to seek funding to deliver that jointly with us in the next cycle of funding availability for flooding interventions, that with that funding coming from the Scottish Government and Scottish Water funding its share. So it's difficult for us to give a firm commitment around timescales, but what we can say is that Cavendish Avenue and one other hotspot within Perth have been identified as the highest shared priorities in terms of delivering improvements, and that will remain, I think, the approach going forward. So we'll be seeking to identify options, make sure that they're technically and economically feasible to deliver, and to get funding in place, and there'll need to be engagement with residents about those, because the nature of the work, particularly the storage element, is relatively disruptive. Significant engineering's involved, so we will need to be carrying out work in the area to achieve improvements that will involve short-term disruption, I'm afraid, for residents while it's happening, and we'll obviously want to speak to customers in the area about that alongside the council to manage that activity when it comes as far as we can. So I hope that's a bit of an answer. I think in terms of Councillor McCall, I'm very happy to speak to you about that. There's a sort of complicated issue around the level of service that Scottish Water can provide and that the council seeks to provide in relation to man-made drainage systems. Extremely intense rainstorms are a major problem for man-made drainage systems, and there is a limit to what we can achieve. We would of course like to achieve more, but we have problems of this kind in many locations across Scotland, unfortunately, and we have to try and use the funding that's available to us to help as many customers as possible. So I suppose the reason we say that, in part reflecting some of what Carol has said, is that customers need to understand the level of service that we can provide, and that there is a limit to that, so that if there is a residual flood risk, they can consider whether there's anything that they wish to do over and above the level of service that we can offer. And I appreciate that's not welcome news to people, especially in these circumstances, but it's important that people know that, rather than finding out when in a weather event such as this potentially flooding occurs in the future and they haven't had the opportunity to consider what they may wish to do about it themselves.
Great, thanks for that, Gavin. Okay, in terms of the next question then, a question about the timeframes to deliver the delivery of the ICS. Have we covered that? Is that something?
I think we've probably covered that, unless Peter wants to add anything to what I've said.
Great.
I think, yeah, it's just important. I think you already said, Gavin, that the ICS, the study part, which was the creation of the model to gain a sort of better understanding of existing flood risk, that's kind of phase of the work was completed in December last year. And the work that's been going on since then is a kind of follow-on project to really examine the potential solutions at Cavendish Avenue and a small number of other areas around Perth. So that's more focused in, more targeted at Cavendish Avenue, and more focused on trying to come up with, what the potential solutions might be.
Great, thanks for that, Peter. A question from Councillor Wilson, or Willie Wilson, regarding the flood study ongoing, about taking into account flood waters from the motorway, and can we get an update on the flood pond work in Glasgow Road? Are we able to provide that now, or is that something we might have to get back to?
I think Gavin maybe tell you that under the ICS project, the model that's been built is very extensive. It covers the whole of the city of Perth, basically. So any water that's being fallen as rainfall anywhere near the area basically is captured by the model. It takes care of that and takes account of the whole catchment, basically. That's the purpose of the model. In terms of the update on flood pond work in Glasgow Road, I can get back to Councillor Wilson about that. I don't have that in front of me. Craig McQueen on the call might know what's going on with that. If we can ask him to give a quick comment. If not, we might get back to Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, there's ongoing works along the Craigieburn in general, and we're just finishing at Windsor Terrace at the moment. There's works scheduled for Balmoral Place, Queen Street, and what's all the way up at the dry pond as well. So they will probably continue for the next roughly 4 weeks. They're kind of sequential as we work upstream. I've actually got an update for councillors which will go out tomorrow. If anybody wants further information, then I'll try and stick it in that email. If anybody wants anything else, they can come back to me. I know specifically to the dry pond as well, there was a clearance effort on it, I think it was last year, to increase capacity on it, which Chris Chalmers and Roads Maintenance Partnership done. So that's been completed as well. So we're just doing watercourse works rather than works to the dry pond itself.
Peter, I'll just add in as well. We've currently got a contractor going in to do some, and it's just self-seeder stuff that we're removing round about. I think it's the wet ponds. But that's routine work that we'd have been going ahead whether this event had happened or not. It's just routine stuff that we do on a rolling basis.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Just to say, sorry, Craig McQueen is the engineer in the council's flooding team. I didn't introduce him properly there. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I think a comment from Stuart next, but I think quite a common theme in the sense that Stuart saying anything I can do to stop flooding on my property impacts on my neighbour, which puts the responsibility on me. I feel trapped and unable to act. I think that's certainly a frustration that a number of people are feeling at the moment. Is there anything we can say to advise or help any of the residents at all in that respect?
I'll check that one, Mark. I think the kind of question that Stuart's asking there is probably relates to if you're going to build walls, for instance, around the boundary of your property. I can kind of see what he's getting at there. It's probably a fair comment. But the other things that we were alluding to earlier, and Carol Rayburn in the Scottish Flood Forum was talking about them, there are flood products you can buy which get fitted to your property, door guards, air brake covers, non-return valves, that kind of thing. and they make your property more resilient to flooding. It might just stop the flooding at the wall of your house rather than the boundary wall of your whole property. So there's things that you can do, and they won't necessarily pass on flood risk to your neighbours. And ideally, what we'd like to see is the whole street, or the whole, if there's a row of houses getting affected, if they all take these measures simultaneously, ideally, they're all protected to a degree then, and that's better for everyone.
Thanks a lot for that, Peter. The next comment is around, again, just a follow-up comment from earlier on around the Red Cross and the support they can provide in these situations. And I think certainly we need to look into that for future events. And in terms of doing a review, in terms of lessons learned, we'll certainly pick that up and see if that contacting the Red Cross or any other agency would have been helpful, and whether that will be appropriate in the future. But we can certainly, as Stuart's saying there, in the chat, we will take that away. The next is a comment from, well, it's an anonymous comment. In the property till 7 p.m. with no welfare, which I can imagine has been a very, very difficult thing for people during the and following the flood event. Councillor McCall has made a comment to a question. It was mentioned that an increase in impermeable services is a contributory factor. So is there a plan in place to develop specifications for services that would be more appropriate for areas at risk of flooding? I'm sure that will be the case in terms of any future flood studies and any future flood prevention works. I don't know if anyone wants to answer that more specifically.
I can just say something on that, Mark, that my team works quite a lot with the Council's planning service and Scottish Water and SEPA. We do a lot of work in terms of looking at planning applications, and if a developer's wanting to build and increase development, build new properties, whatever you have in impermeable areas, they're now legally required to gather and manage that surface water at source through sustainable urban drainage systems, or SUDs as well referred to as. So that typically involves the building of a pond or a detention storage area to gather any surface water and release it slowly to mimic the kind of natural effects of if it was a greenfield area, the natural water running off into a watercourse. So basically there should be sort of no net detriment from any new development, to the point that we have existing development that's given us runoff, etc. And that's kind of what the ICS is about, I think, trying to find ways of managing that flood risk.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Peter. Stuart's got another comment and question, saying this flooding from the drain is adversely affecting the foundations of properties, and he's asking the question, whose responsibility is it if we are being affected by overflowing drains or an overflowing drain? Is that the responsibility of the council, Scottish Water, or is that ultimately the responsibility of the homeowner?
Yeah, I think it remains with the landowner, Mark, and the property owner. But equally in saying that, totally acknowledge that if you're the private property owner and you've been flooded by, a drain up the street or a water course that's a bit remote from your property, what can you do about that? But again, that brings us back to the work the council and Scottish Water are doing on the ICS project to try and find ways of managing and, if possible, reducing that flood risk.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Mark, that the sort of nature of the ICS work is that it's not necessarily the case that any one party is in an absolute sense responsible for flooding that occurs, but in terms of actually responding to customers and providing assistance, it's not totally clear from the question, I'm afraid. So Stuart's welcome to clarify if he'd want to, but if the flooding is actually coming back into the house through its drains, through you know, shower trays, toilets and so on, that would be classed as internal sewer flooding by Scottish Water, and therefore the response, the sort of operational responsibility for responding to assist customers and clean up in that circumstance rests with Scottish Water. I'm not certain if that's the scenario that Stuart's referring to, but just to be clear about that.
Thanks, Gavin, and thanks, Peter. Just moving down then to the next question, quite a long question, but I think ultimately the question is around if water's coming up through the floorboards into a building, effectively what can be done to address that? Are there any measures that can be put in place, or is it to prevent that, or is unfortunately if that's the scenario, there's not really much that can be done, or any preventative measures to be put in place?
Just going to ask Carol Rayburn what the kind of standard advice from the Scottish Flood Forum is on that. Carol, any ideas?
If the water has come up through the Solon, basically you need to track it back to where it kind of originated from. So that may be from sources outside the property, but once it's actually in the Solon, then unfortunately you are looking at drying out, and that's either pumps and then dehumidifiers, because as we know, plasterboard, etc., will suck the water up, and that's why you see in stripping out of properties such a massive need to take plasterboard back to quite a high extent. So the drying out process is a slow one, and again in Perth we've got some older style properties as well. So it's not a quick process, and it can be quite lengthy. So the main takeaway or tip that I would give you this evening is to ensure that you get a drying out certificate, because that will, at the end of the process, that will give you some assurance that the process has been completed correctly, and that you're then safe to move on to the next stage of reinstatement. But I'm sorry I can't be a bit more positive about that for you. But that's the best advice that I can give you in terms of get the water out as soon as possible, and then get the dehumidifiers in to dry things out, and then work from there.
I know there are measures that you can take, but probably more pertinent to new build properties where, you know, for instance, building concrete floors, waterproofing, tanking and the like, but fully admit that's not easy if you've got an older existing property to suddenly, you know, use that kind of measure to protect it.
I think also as well that's reading the insurance policy and having a discussion with your insurance company as well about what actual support they will provide as well, because if you're lucky enough to have a new for old, then you can think about putting in resilient measures such as concrete floors and stainless steel kitchens, and there are kind of less expensive measures also that will make your home more resilient moving forward. But again, it's checking that insurance policy as to the terms and what you can expect. One of the useful pieces of information that we've been providing people has been the Association of British Insurers, who have a really handy guide with a process for what to expect. Now, as I said at the top of the meeting, what we can expect at the moment is very different, I suppose, in terms of COVID, but it will give you a rule of thumb to kind of operate by, and none of us expect to be in this situation. We understand that it's a really emotional time for you all. You're out of your properties, but we are here to help you, and if there's anything that we can do, please do get in contact. But that EBI guide is a really useful tool for giving you some indication of what the process kind of remotely will look like at the present time. So give us a call and we can get that passed on to you.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Carol. Just moving down the list of questions, I think it's just a follow-up or some clarity requested by Stuart's wife. I was asking when the integrated catchment study will be delivered.
I think probably, Mark, we've addressed that earlier, and we've just been running behind the chat, but the integrated catchment study was completed in terms of the modelling work of all the drainage systems and how they interact in December last year. I appreciate from customers' point of view the delivery timescale for a project are probably more significant. We're not able to confirm a delivery timescale yet, but beyond what I've already said, that we've tried to do everything possible to put ourselves in a position to deliver a project here as quickly as practically possible, working jointly with Scottish Water and the Council.
Thanks for that, Gavin. Just I think a follow-up question from Councillor Wilson. Does the study for a new flood plan include looking at capacity of current flood ponds and how these may be enhanced? Could someone give some reassurance to Councillor Wilson that that will be the case?
Thanks, Mark. I'm not sure what Councillor Wilson's question is. If he's talking about our flood risk management plans, yeah, we'll obviously be producing those for the second cycle of plans, you know, from sort of, they'll be published June 2022 and apply for the 6-year period thereafter. What is in those will be similar to what we've got, albeit, you know, we might have different flood schemes for different areas of Perth and Kinross and that kind of thing, and different studies for different areas, just depending on where the flood risk is. And where what we need to do to try and address that. I'm not sure that the flood ponds, whether we're talking about SUDS there or whether it's the storage ponds up in the Craigieburn catchment, which is two different things really. We do have, in terms of the storage ponds in the Craigieburn catchment, we do have a flood study for the Craigieburn that we're going to get moving hopefully this financial year, which will look at the entire Craigieburn catchment again, everything from the ponds down to the flood storage area on the South Inch. And in terms of the sort of SUDS proposals we have, we've got developers guidance out on the council's website just now, which was consulted on I think earlier on this year, to look at the standards for attenuation and things in them. That's just part of the ongoing work that we do with planning and reviewing flood risk assessment work that comes in through the planning process.
Just Craig McQueen here, engineer in the flooding team. Just a quick follow-up, Peter, that we've actually got a meeting on the Craigieburn next Tuesday night where this question might be better placed. I think the wet ponds and the dry ponds on the Craigieburn don't really have an impact for residents at Cavendish Avenue or Grey Street. The drainage systems at those locations are completely separate. So it's a good question, but maybe not one for tonight, I guess.
Great, thanks for that, Craig. Just moving down the chat then, just a clarification from Stuart. Stuart saying that there is no ingress of water into the house, but into the foundations, which are 3 to 4 foot deep. The house housed in the area are built on clay and we have been advised by builders who witnessed one of the floods last year that continued flooding like this will damage the foundations and cause settlement. So thanks for that, Stuart, and I can certainly understand your frustration with that situation. Just moving down again, a similar comment. I'm coming in from the garden in through the foundations. It's coming in from the garden, sorry, in through the foundations into the space under the floorboards, then rising up through the floorboards. So a similar situation to Stuart. Question from again, why should this be left to the homeowner when this is being caused by the actual drains? Insurance companies will end up not covering these properties as this will be classed as a high risk. Unfortunately, I don't think it was caused by the drains. It was caused by the level of rainfall during a very short period of time, which was not something which we can forecast. And unfortunately, the system doesn't allow for that much at the moment, certainly anyway, that much rainfall in such a short period of time. But I can understand people's frustration when these things happen, and as as Gavin and Peter have outlined, there are plans in place to look to improve the situation, albeit we can't give you any specific timescales around those measures being implemented.
Can we just say as well, Mark, that certainly don't want to give homeowners the impression that it's been kind of left to them. It's very difficult if you don't know a lot about flooding and you get flooded. You maybe move into a home and you get flooded. To know what to do about that, it's quite difficult. But there is kind of help and support on offer. We've got Scottish Flood Forum for one thing on the call, and the council's website's got various links and advice to information. So there's a bit of support out there to try and help homeowners to become more resilient to flooding and just to raise their awareness of the things that they can do. There's also an insurance side to the question. We can maybe try and address that. I don't know if Carol wants to talk a little bit about that.
I was just going to chip in there, Peter. So there is a scheme called Flood Rave. So it's capital F LOOD, capital RE, and it's a government-backed scheme which basically works in conjunction with a homeowner's existing insurer to cover those situations where those that have been impacted by flooding, to ensure that there is some continuity of insurance and that there shouldn't be a hike in premiums for those that have been affected by flooding. So it's certainly something when you come to negotiate your next period of cover to mention to your insurer, so that make sure that you mention that you want to be part of the Flood Rave scheme, and we can supply you with more information on that. So I know that we're getting a list of all the questions, so we can certainly follow up with you and send you some more information on that.
Thanks for that, Carol. Finally then, just I think it's more of a comment than a question. I'm a council tenant and it's just wooden floorboards, so it has to be what the council do, which is to place plywood down on top of floorboards, and that's it. But the property needs some sort of ceiling around the foundations to stop water getting in under the floorboards. Well, in terms of that comment stroke question, that certainly we can take away and speak to our colleagues in housing around the measures that they're putting in place to address these things and put protection measures in place as we move forward. Yeah, it's
probably important to say, Mark, that while we kind of sit and say that land and property owners are responsible, in some instances that is the council. Council owns its housing assets in various locations throughout Perth and Kinross, so I know housing in certain areas throughout the area have taken action to make properties a bit more resilient to flooding. And we'll have to get an update on any specific plans for Cavendish Avenue, Grey Street area, but we can certainly happy to take that away and get an update for tenants on that.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Peter. Okay, then I think that's all the questions that we've received this evening. Hopefully we've answered them to your satisfaction, but if that's not the case, as I said earlier, and as Peter reiterated, we will have future discussions. We are happy to talk to you. We'll meet with you separately, individually, or as a group, to help you through this difficult time. So I'd like to thank all the colleagues who contributed tonight. I'd like to thank everyone who's actually taken the time out that evening to call in. This is a very, very difficult time. I've never been flooded at all, so I can't say that I appreciate the difficulties that you're experiencing, because I can't. It must be very difficult, very frustrating, and I hope we've provided the answers that you were looking for, and apologies if we haven't. But we are here. We are here to help and support you, and please get in touch if you need any further information or any further advice or support from the council or any of the partners who attended tonight. So I wish you good night and thank you all. Thanks a lot.